DEI, it's a buzzword these days. It seems like everyone has an opinion on it. But how should we, as people who seek to walk in truth and to live an unhindered life, approach this topic? We're going to talk about all of that and more on today's episode of Unhindered. If you're like me, the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, they sound nice. They sound kind. They sound Christ-like. But not everything that glitters is gold. And if we are going to live an unhindered life, one of the first things we're going to do is learn to look below the surface, to read beyond the headline. So today, let's do that.
I never understood what people were saying about what was wrong with it, because all we're trying to do is make a better campus for more students.
There are some programs that are viewed to be divisive, where we start breaking people up into compartments. You're in this tribe, you're in this tribe, you're in this tribe. Do you feel that we can move away from that?
Well, it's not either or. So there's got to be space for people who come from marginalized backgrounds to have their own space, to represent their cultures, to just feel comfortable. A campus like this, can be really hard if you're a student of color, for example. And so it's nice to have spaces that are meant for you.
I don't think anything about DEI pushes down another group. It is lifting up people who have been marginalized, people whose parents and grandparents did not have the chance to go to college. It is uplifting us all.
The rationale goes something like this. Students in some ethnic communities face challenges that others simply don't, and DEI resources can help level a playing field that's been traditionally uneven on multiple levels. Now, here's the rub, and it's a serious question. When does that academic, cultural, and economic playing field become level? And who makes that call? In other words, does DEI become a form of reparation which America's white majority pays in perpetuity? Because wrong or right, I guarantee that's how many Republicans in the Texas legislature see it.
DEI is just a rebranded version of hating white people.
DEI, in this case, stands for divisive, erroneous, and insidious.
DEI, which stands for didn't earn it.
Discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination.
I have a hard time accepting that anyone thinks that these are negatives. DEI is about building more inclusive processes. To me, the idea of no DEI, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, well, you just said what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And that's what one of the big criticisms is that it's what it looks like, that there's diversity of bodies, that you've got a certain number of one from a certain race, another race, another race. Has nothing to do with diversity of ideology, has nothing to do with diversity of background. It has to do with quotas.
Yeah. Well, a few things. If DEI works anywhere, it has to work everywhere. Let me tell you where DEI does not work. The NBA and the NFL. Where are the Asian, Latino, and Hispanic basketball and football players? Where are the black guys in the National Hockey League? When moral law stands alone and DEI initiatives are based upon that, somebody gets to pretend that they are God.
And I need to say this, Dr. Phil, contemporary DEI cannot work without what's called prescriptive racism. And what is that? It's when you have a script, basically, a list of things that a person of a particular race is supposed to abide by, and if he doesn't, he is considered inauthentic or defective. You get this from Black people as well as white people, right? In fact, contemporary DEI cannot stand without prescriptive racism. It is prescriptive racism.
We confuse equity with equality, and equality means that everybody is treated the same. And equity means that we need to look at, for example, there's a great visual of a short person and a tall person, and they're both looking over a fence, and they have the same block to stand on. And the tall person, of course, can see over the fence, but the short person has not been lifted up enough to see over the fence. And so when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about the fact that Some demographics come to the table and have to overcome racism, unconscious bias, misogyny. And so how do we help level the playing field for everyone?
Okay, so that means you're trying to create equality of outcome.
Mm-hmm.
First, we have to talk about what DEI is. We're going to talk about what its goals are and how it affects our lives, how it affects your life, and how you should approach the topic. So the main goal of DEI is equity. Diversity and inclusion, the D and the I, are actually tools to achieve the E, equity. So we're actually not going to start with a D. We're going to start with the I. We're going to start with equity. And like the lady on the Dr. Phil show was describing, equality and equity are not equal. They are not synonyms. They're not the same thing. Equality is an equal opportunity for everyone, equal opportunities, whereas equity is equal outcomes. Everybody gets the same thing in the end. And we like the sound of equity because it sounds fair. We like fairness. But is it fair? Let's take an imaginary example and see if it's fair. Let's say that last week I worked 60 hours and I had a gross paycheck of $2,000. And after taxes were taken out, I took home $1,000. And let's say that you worked 20 hours last week and you had a gross paycheck of $1,200. And after taxes, you took home $1,000. So I worked 60 hours, you worked 20 hours. Our gross pay was very different, but in the end, we took home the same amount. Now, I'm not saying that that is a textbook definition of equity. I'm just making a point that we had an equal outcome. Was that equal outcome fair? Did we put in the same amount of work? No, we did not. I worked 3 times harder and I took home the same amount as you. Let's think of another example. Let's take baseball. We're a big baseball family over here. Let's say that we applied equity to a baseball game. That would mean that every single player on the team needs to get the same number of hits, needs to hit the same number of home runs, and further that every team needs to have the same score in the end. So at the end of the game, the 2 scores between the 2 teams are always going to be the same. The world wouldn't be very fun if we had equity, right? What is our incentive? What would motivate us? No matter how hard we try, everything's just the same for everyone. So why try? All right, diversity. Ask anyone on the street if they think diversity is a good thing. And most people, without hesitation, will say, yeah, of course, diversity is a great thing. Everybody knows that. But if somebody asked me if diversity is a good thing, I would say, it depends. What's the context? I mean, I think in many ways, diversity is great. God's creation is full of diversity. Diversity was God's idea. He made all kinds of smells and tastes and colors and textures, and he made all kinds of different animals and different people and different plants, and landscapes are different. And I mean, there's so much diversity or variety in the world. Diversity is beautiful and wonderful. But if we're talking about something specific, it may or may not be good. So let's say I'm putting siding on my house. If I'm putting siding on my house, is diversity a good thing? If I have 10 pieces of white aluminum siding and 10 pieces of blue wood siding and 10 pieces of tan vinyl siding, and some are in 2-foot lengths and some are in 4-foot lengths and some are in 12-foot lengths, is that a good thing? Is that going to look good on my house? Is diversity of siding on my house a good thing or a bad thing? Now, my neighbor can have white siding and I can have blue siding, and that would be totally fine. Diversity within the neighborhood is fine, but diversity of siding on one building, not so good. Not typically what we like. And so diversity is not necessarily always a good thing. And you may say, well, that's a silly example. Well, it is kind of silly, but it also is taking the logic. Diversity is a good thing. That's a statement. That's a truth statement that people are making. And they're saying that diversity is always a good thing. You have to take that truth statement and then apply the logic all the way through. Does that logic make sense when you apply it all the way through? And I have to say, no, it doesn't. We can't say that diversity is always a good thing. Sometimes I often hear people on the left chanting that mantra that diversity is strength. And it seems that everyone just nods their heads in agreement without even thinking past the end of their nose. Like, diversity is strength. Does that even make sense? It sounds good, but doesn't make sense. Just because a statement sounds nice does not make it true. Just because it has a ring to it or sounds kind or loving does not make it true. In George Orwell's 1984 book, the book called 1984, in that book, the public also blindly accepted oxymoronic statements such as diversity is strength. They accepted statements like war is peace. Oh, war is peace. That sounds so kind. Wait, what? That doesn't even make sense. Freedom is slavery was another one accepted in that book. Freedom is slavery? If you think about it, diversity is strength is basically saying the same thing, because the word diversity is derived from the French word diversité. I don't know if I'm saying that right, which means wickedness and perversity. And it also comes from the ancient Latin word diversitatem. Again, don't know if I'm saying that right. And that Latin word means contradiction or disagreement. The root of the word diversity is die, which means to split something into two. It is division. By definition, the word diversity insinuates division. Diversity and division have the same root word of die. Machiavelli gave a basic rule of politics. He said, divide and conquer. It's interesting that the word diversity is rooted in the Latin word that meant disagreement, because perhaps the primary reason that the Roman Empire fell was because it spread itself too thin and it allowed invasions of the Germanic tribes to come in. And the weight of that diversity, of those tribes coming in, of things becoming more diverse, was too much for the empire to sustain itself. India is considered to be one of the most diverse countries in the world. And it worked so well there that its eastern and western provinces split into Pakistan and Bangladesh in a bloody war. That's how well diversity worked there. So the statements, diversity is always a good thing, or diversity is strength, again, the logic doesn't work. What I'm saying is the underlying idea of DEI, that diversity in and of itself is good, period, is flawed. It does not hold up under a microscope. And if the underlying assumption of something is wrong, if the legs of a table are bad, the table is going to fall. You got to have the underlying assumptions be true before you institute something like DEI. So when it comes to DEI in our modern world, what type of diversity are we talking about? Are we talking about diversity of races, diversity of sexual preferences, otherwise known as sexual orientations, diversity of religions, diversity of political affiliations, heights, weights, ideas? What type of diversity are we referring to? Again, if you think of baseball, my son's played baseball, some level of diversity, certain types of diversity would be good, right? You need somebody who can play first base well. You need catchers, you need pitchers, you need people in the outfield, people who are good at the infield. You need all different types of players. If everybody could be good at every position, that would be amazing, but that's pretty unrealistic, right? So when a coach is recruiting people for the team, he's looking for people who are good at different positions. So some diversity in their skill and ability level. And often that has to do with how tall they are, how fast they are. So we need some diversity in those aspects. But I'll tell you what you don't care about on a baseball team. You don't care about diversity of race. You don't care about diversity of sexual orientations. That has nothing to do with baseball. And you definitely don't want diversity of gender, because that would completely change the game. So diversity can be a good and helpful thing, or it can be a bad and detrimental thing. It just depends on what type of diversity we're talking about and what the context is. Are we talking about siding on a house? Or are we talking about a baseball team? Are we talking about a workplace? And in our modern world, when they're referring to DEI, it seems that they are only talking about diversity of race and diversity of sexual orientation. And the context in which they're talking about it is usually the workplace, school, TV, movies, probably other things. Those are the first ones that come to my mind. And I'm just not sure that focusing on someone's outer appearance, how light or dark their skin is a good way to determine who should be in a workplace or on a TV or in a school. And sexual orientation is focusing on who people like to have sex with in the privacy of their own home. And I'm not sure that has anything to do with any of those things. And finally, we have the I, which is for inclusion. And inclusion is the act or practice of including and accommodating people who have been historically excluded. It's very similar to diversity and sometimes hard to tell the difference between diversity and inclusion. The way I understand it is that inclusion goes a little further than diversity to actually how someone feels. Do they feel integrated? Do they feel valued? Do they feel a part of something? Whereas diversity is more about just representation. Are we representing all the different kinds of people from the outside looking in? Is everybody represented? Inclusion is more about the inside of each person. Do they feel included? Do they feel like they belong? It's this idea that every human is entitled to feel accepted and affirmed in their environment. So all of us should be making sure that happens. So if a person is not suited for a particular kind of job, inclusion says that we should be changing that job to fit them, to make it more suitable for them so that they can feel more included, so they can feel more integrated. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about people feeling included. I think belonging is a big human need, and that it is important for us to include people whenever possible and for us to help people feel like they have a place where they belong. But an over focus on this, especially in the workplace, has been detrimental. If a business is more focused on how their employees feel than they are on their bottom line, then their business will likely fail. And also, these DEI efforts have only focused on how certain groups feel, and they do that to the detriment of other groups. For instance, they might be more concerned about how Black people in their business feel than how white people feel. How white people feel is not valued. So it's not really inclusive. And it's also not really inclusive because if you don't agree with DEI, if you question it at all, you are not included. So it only includes people who buy into the concept and who are on board with it. I looked into applying to a local university to be a professor, and this is a state university. And one of the requirements to submit your application was that with your application, you had to write an essay about how you use DEI in your life in a time when you have used DEI in your workplace in the past. So you have to use DEI and write an essay about it to even submit an application. So that automatically is going to filter out anybody who does not buy into this concept, which I hope by the end of this video you understand why I and others do not buy into this concept. My goal today is to make that very understandable and very clear. So if you're unsure about DEI or you support DEI, I pray that you will listen to the end, all the way to the end of this video, because you're going to learn a lot. We have a lot to cover today, so you may see me glancing at my notes occasionally. I like to usually speak off the cuff, but there is just so much that I don't want to forget to tell you about. So DEI, you cannot talk about it without talking about CRT, another set of words, and CRT stands for critical race theory. DEI and CRT go hand in hand. CRT, critical race theory, is a set of ideas, a set of beliefs, a worldview, if you will, that says that racial bias is inherent, it's baked into Western society, especially in our political and social institutions. And it was put there, that racism was purposely put there in our political and social institutions by white people for the purpose of holding and maintaining power over people of color, as they're called. So CRT is actually just one of a group of theories called critical theories. And critical theories were developed by Marxists about 100 years ago. Marxists are people who follow Karl Marx. He was a philosopher and an activist in the 1800s who taught that all society can be split into two classes, the capitalists and the workers, and that the capitalists are all exploiting the workers. So he was against a capitalist society because he saw it as elite capitalists with workers who they could exploit and then they could stay rich. This is where the idea of white supremacy comes from. And so Marxists believe that the white people are trying to suppress people of color. The white people are the capitalists. People of color are the workers in many of the scenarios that are put forth. He taught that there are limited resources that we are all competing for. And so somebody is like trying to keep more resources, keep more power by oppressing other people. They don't believe that there's enough to go around. So the goal of critical theories, of which critical race theory is a part, is to critique, to influence, and to transform our social and political institutions toward a Marxist or a socialist society. And if you wonder, you ever notice like how gay seems to be a race? I say gay means LGBTQIA plus, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that every time I say it. I'm just going to say gay or queer. Do you ever notice how that has become a race? It seems that they have the same kind of rhetoric that maybe Black people or another race in our country has had about their oppression and their marginalization. Well, if you've ever wondered, how do they all of a sudden become a race? Look no further than these theorists that I'm telling you about, including Herbert Marcuse and Michel Foucault. I think I said that right. Because they developed critical race theory and they developed queer theory, which we are going to get more into in a future episode. So CRT is destructive. It is destructive. Its goal is a revolution, not reform. We don't reform the police, we defund them. It is a revolution, and it's mostly interested in problematizing things, tearing things down, than it is interested in building anything constructive. It seeks to deconstruct everything that we traditionally know to be our Western Judeo-Christian values and traditions. It criticizes and tears down what we've built so that they can erect their new gods, if you will. CRT actually derives from a postmodern thought which says that there is no absolute truth and that all knowledge is either invented or made up, not discovered. So it doesn't believe in science the way we believe in science. Science is about discovering absolute truths, right? Discovering the law of gravity, the law of the conservation of matter. In CRT, that's not true. In CRT, all knowledge is invented and there is no absolute truth. And it's more than just a philosophy or a way to run government. It's an entirely different world view. It's an analytical lens that one can use to view the world around them. That's what a worldview is. It says that racism is ingrained into the fabric and the system of American society through power structures that are based on white supremacy. That's what CRT says. And that is done in order to marginalize people of color. That's what it states. It rejects meritocracy, which is earning positions based on your ability. It rejects individual rights, rejects democracy, and it rejects free enterprise. It says that all of those are just ways for people to have power and privilege over other people. And it elevates subjective truth over logic, science, reason, and objective truth. It divides people into oppressed groups and oppressive groups, so that the capitalists and the workers, the oppressed and the oppressors, and everyone fits into one group or another. They call this the social binary. And you could see on this chart here, I think it's funny that they don't believe in a gender binary anymore. There's no male or female, but they definitely believe in a social binary, that everyone is either oppressed or an oppressor with no in between. So in this chart, on the left side, these are the oppressed. On the right side are the oppressors, and in the middle is what they use to oppress people. So it's in CRT, it says that white people oppress people of color through racism. The owning class oppresses the poor working class or middle class through classism. Men oppress women through sexism. Heterosexuals oppress queers. So you can see all the ways that everyone has to be in either the left column or the right column. And they say there's no in between. It is a binary. So how do you like the sound of CRT so far? If you don't like the sound of CRT, guess what? DEI programs are actually one of CRT's tools. So if you don't like CRT, you're not going to like DEI and what it causes. DEI is actually founded upon a postmodern idea that came from critical race theory called intersectionality. Intersectionality is that interconnected and cumulative way in which people claim that social categories like race, gender, and sexual orientation create like overlapping forms of discrimination. So the more categories you're in, so if you're a Black female gay person, then those are intersecting. You have 3 categories of supposed marginalization that are intersecting. And so they say that you actually have more special knowledge. You have more truth. You should be elevated. You should be listened to. So standpoint epistemology says that however you are situated in society, however many marginalized groups, oppressed groups that you fit into, that identity dictates what you can know and what you cannot know. And they say that like you're in that right column. If you're a male, you have one thing in the right column and you're white, and then you have another thing in the white column and you're heterosexual or AKA normal, then you have another thing in the right column. And so you cannot know anything. You don't know anything because you have not been oppressed. You're in all of these oppressor groups and you don't understand what it's like to be oppressed. Is that true? That no white people know what it's like to be oppressed? That no heterosexuals know what it's like to be oppressed? That no men know what it's like to be oppressed? Absolutely not. And then if you're in the left column, however many things you can fit in the left column, boy, you are the bigger victim. Everybody's competing to see who can be the biggest victim. And the more of those you fit into, the better when it comes to CRT. I'm happy to listen to people who have different life experiences from me. They've maybe grown up in a different culture or they are a different gender or whatever. I'm happy to learn from them, and I would love for them to learn from me. I'm not saying we can't learn from each other's experiences in life, but is it true that because they have certain differences that they should be elevated, that they have more truth, that they have more special knowledge, that they can know things that I can't know? If somebody is a different color than me, it means that they're like somehow more special because they have had experiences that I haven't had? No, because I've had experiences that they have not had. We all have different experiences based on many factors in our life. But what intersectionality and critical race theory wants you to believe is that if 2 people are both heterosexual Black females, they think the same. They see the world the same. They experience the world the same. And that is not true. I'm willing to bet that Oprah and Candace Owens, who are both heterosexual Black females, do not have the same life experience and do not see everything the same way. And if they were in a room together, would probably have a lot that they don't agree on. So to say that people in certain categories are all going to think the same, that in itself is actually racist. And if you buy into all of this junk that these people are selling us, you're said to be woke. And I find that funny because the woke is the past tense of the word wake, which means to like become aware, to become alert, to be stirred to consciousness. And if you are buying all of this stuff, I don't think that woke is a good way to describe you. I think asleep is a good way to describe you. I think you're in a trance. I think you're being led around by a bridle. And my message to you is to wake up. Does racism exist? Yes, of course it does. I have met racist people of many different colors. Do sometimes minorities or women get oppressed? Absolutely. I'm a woman. I've experienced some forms of sexism, nothing major, nothing like what they claim we experience. But some women probably have, and in other countries, women certainly do. Do some people get excluded because they talk weird, like that gay accent that people have, or because they are dressing up in a dress when they're a man, or because they are parading around the streets naked in June? Do some of those people get excluded for acting strangely? Yes, that happens. Does this mean that critical race theory and DEI are good things? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Are they the answer to these things? No. How can we build our future upon something with so many flawed underlying table legs, so many underlying assumptions that are flawed? DEI assumes that diversity is strength and that it is always good no matter what. That equity is always good and that inclusion is of the utmost importance. And it assumes that everything we've ever known in America was built for the primary purpose of white people suppressing and oppressing people of color. Like everything that was built, they were like, we got to make sure that we are oppressing people of color with this and that we're keeping power. And it assumes that subjective truth is more valuable than science, reason, and logic. Those are a lot of assumptions right there that are flawed. So can we really if those are the legs of the table, can we really use the tabletop? I think it's going to be like this. Maybe you're saying, yeah, but this doesn't really affect my life. This is stuff they talk about in political debates or things they discuss in university classrooms. I would ask you to give me a few moments to show you that this very much affects your life. I have several things that I will talk to you about of how it affects your life, ending with the biggest and most important one. It's true that these things are primarily talked about in politics and in universities, but it is also infiltrating the very fabric. They talk about the very fabric being racist, but actually CRT is becoming the fabric of our nation right now and our culture that we live and move and breathe in every day. And the students coming out of these universities that are being indoctrinated by this stuff, they are the future of our country. They are being indoctrinated in ways that will forever change our society, and that should concern you. All right, so first, DEI keeps us from looking at the real causes. Social justice is just always trying to blame inequity and equitable outcomes for the problems that we have. Kendi, who's a well-known author on the CRT topic, in his book Stamped from the Beginning, says racial discrimination is the sole cause of racial disparities in this country and in the world at large. So when you look at it at the end and you look back and you say, wow, the whites are doing this, but the blacks are doing this, and the Hispanics are doing this, and the Asians are doing this, and they're different. The only reason that they could be different is because of racial discrimination. That's what he teaches. But I say that disparity of outcomes, different outcomes for different people, no matter what races they are, does not necessarily mean that one of them was oppressed. Just because they had different outcomes does not mean that one of them was holding down the other one. Let's think of what some other reasons could be for maybe someone lagging behind. What are the other possible causes? Maybe one of them didn't put forth as much effort. Maybe one of them didn't understand the process. Maybe one of them wasn't aware of the opportunities available to them. Maybe they had some core beliefs that were driving their behavior in a bad way. Maybe one of them had a good father in their home and the other one had no father at all. Maybe one of them experienced trauma in their life and the other one didn't. Maybe they had different diets. One had a healthy diet, one had an unhealthy diet, different lifestyles. Maybe they grew up under different religious beliefs, different family of origin issues. There are so many reasons that could explain why two different people or two different groups of people would have different outcomes. And racial discrimination makes the list, but it is not the sole cause. It is not the only thing on the list. So DEI puts our focus in the wrong place, and we become overly focused on race, sexual orientation, and gender. So another reason why DEI is not the answer is because DEI requires us to lower or eliminate, in some cases, our standards. So if the only thing you're concerned about is equal outcomes, that in the end, everybody gets the same thing, the only way that you can achieve that is by cheating people. You got people that are graduating high school not knowing how to read because they say that everybody has to have the same outcome. Everybody, once they get to 12th grade, has to get a diploma. We can't have some groups of people getting diploma and some groups not. That would be disparity of outcomes. That would be unequitable. They don't say, oh, the equitable thing would be that everybody has to know how to read, that's the outcome. That makes a little more sense. No, the outcome is everybody has to get a diploma. And so when people can't meet that standard, then they don't say, oh, well, I guess that we're going to have unequal outcomes. No, they say we have to lower that standard so that everybody can meet the outcome. Or sometimes we have to completely get rid of the standard. And that makes things worse in the world, not better. And for what? To protect people's feelings and to virtue signal? Is that why we're getting rid of all of our standards? If the outcomes not being equal overwhelmingly affect one racial group, that's called disparate impact. And our government does not stand for it. So I told you in a previous video about Sheetz, the gas station, the federal government sued them because when they went through their process, their normal hiring process, it just naturally resulted in less Black people getting hired. And some of those Black people filed a complaint. The reason they were not hired was because Sheetz has a policy that people have to pass a criminal background check to get hired, and they had not passed it because they made choices, because they committed crimes, because they had a criminal background record. So then the federal government is requiring Sheetz to lower their standard, like you can't have that standard. That standard is too high. Requiring people to not be a criminal in order to work for you, that standard is just way too high, and it's causing disparate impact, and therefore you have to eliminate or remove that standard. And we are in danger. Think about what this means. It has already been playing out on the world stage, and this very much affects every single one of us. If standards are lowered for pilots to fly commercial airplanes that we fly in, what does that mean? If standards are lowered when it comes to people who are building those airplanes, what does that mean? What about surgeons who are working on our bodies if their standards are lowered or eliminated? We cannot function well in a society like this. Another reason why DEI is not the answer is because it is racist towards white people. It excludes Christians. It excludes heterosexuals. There's whole groups of people who it does not include. Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, they made headlines back in 2017 when they called for a day of absence. They asked all white students and faculty to stay home, to leave campus, to not be there, in the spirit of recognizing systemic racism, bringing awareness to systemic racism. And a biology professor there named Brett Weinstein, who was actually not a Christian conservative from what I understand. He actually labeled himself a liberal progressive at the time, but he saw through this day of absence and he objected to it. And he said that it in itself was actually a form of racial segregation. And so he was not okay with it. And he wrote a letter to the university objecting to it. And he said, one's right to speak or to be must never be based on skin color. He was in effect fighting racism. Isn't that what we all want? To fight racism, to be sure that no one's rights are ever taken away based on skin color? That's what we all want, right? But all the white students and faculty were excluded from campus for a day. And one might think that Professor Weinstein was applauded for standing up and taking the stance. But on the contrary, he was attacked and ridiculed and screamed out by a horde of students who were calling for his termination. He was branded a racist, and he was told that he was supporting the very thing that he was actually fighting against.
This is not about you.
I'm talking about this is all about him.
On terms of white privilege. This is not a discussion. You have lost that one.
You said some racist. Can you apologize? I did not.
Okay. Stop telling people colors are useless. You're useless. Get the out.
History could pivot in the direction of the values that you are standing here for.
Yeah, resign.
What?
Resign.
Coca-Cola had a diversity training for some of their employees in 2021, and I'm going to show you some of the slides that were leaked from that diversity training. And for those of you listening, instead of watching on YouTube, I will try to read off some of the things that are on these slides. Understanding what it means to be white, challenging what it means to be racist. To be less white is to be less arrogant, to be less certain, to be less ignorant, to be more humble, to listen, to believe. White people are socialized to feel that they are inherently superior. Try to be less white. I find it interesting that they think they can define what it means to be white. All white is how much melanin you don't have in your skin. And I don't think you can take a huge group of people who are all considered white because they're under some threshold of melanin in their skin and say that they all have the same experience and they all are the same. They all need to be less ignorant and more humble and whatnot. You cannot say that about an entire group of people. That is prejudice. That is stereotypical. That is a form of racism. Their goal is to destroy our culture, including our Judeo-Christian values that they see as a white thing, because they see whites as having been the ones to spread the gospel, and therefore they think that it was done in an effort to have power over people, because everything done by who they consider to be the white man was done with negative intentions.
Is Christianity a white man's religion?
Of course it is. Unless we're talking about the Coptic Christian church from Ethiopia, right, in Eastern Africa. When we look at how Christianity was proselytized, how the mission of Christianity was spread around the world, who has primarily written the doctrine of Christianity, the people who originally spread it throughout the world, those were white people.
Kendi, the same author I talked about earlier, also has a very popular book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And not only in his other book does he say that racial discrimination is the only cause of racial disparities, but in this book, he says we cannot be anti-racist if we are homophobic or transphobic. To be queer anti-racist is to understand the privileges of my cisgender, of my masculinity, of my heterosexuality, of their intersections. So in other words, he's saying you can't be a Christian and be an anti-racist. So if you are Christian, if you believe that homosexuality and transgenderism are not of God or not okay, should not be encouraged and supported, then you are racist. Again, critical race theory and queer theory, they go hand in hand. They were developed by the same people. So critical race theory is against Christianity. DEI is against Christianity. So with DEI in place, what does the future look like? We have to ask ourselves this. What does the future look like for straight, white, Christian males? Look, if we keep going in the trajectory we're going with DEI, look 50 years into the future, where do you see white, straight, Christian males? Because the proponents of CRT see them in not a good place, and they're happy about that. If Marxists have it their way, the future for white, straight Christian males looks very grim. CRT is dangerous for Christians because it sounds good to them. I am a Christian. We're against racism. We understand that God is not a respecter of persons. We understand that we are all one in Christ, that we are all created in the image of God, that God is the creator of the human race, that we are all one race. So Christianity by belief does not like racism. And so many Christians unknowingly are embracing CRT. Not that they don't know they're embracing it, but they don't know everything that I'm talking about today. And they're embracing CRT because they think they're doing a good thing. They're inviting this into the church building, but it is actually parasitic to the church. Everything is going to be focused on race and sexual orientation and gender. That's going to be the primary lens through which all of life is viewed. It's also parasitic for many other reasons that I will not get into. Growing ethnic tensions in our country are a problem, but they are not the problem. CRT advocates imply that they are the only ones that are seeking justice. And if you disagree with CRT or in DEI, then you are for injustice. And so when you take this into the church, you end up with compassionate Christians on one side who are fighting for social justice, and then they are judging the Christians on the other side who understand how devastating CRT is to the church, how devastating it is to our country. And they label them as insensitive Christians. Oh, they're just not compassionate. They're the insensitive Christians. And next thing you know, we have diversity in the church, meaning we have a division in the church, not diversity in a good way, in a bad way. We've got what those labeled compassionate Christians and those labeled insensitive Christians. Also, if you bring CRT into the church, it is going to bring into question a lot of biblical teachings that the church was founded upon, such as women's role in the church and a stance on homosexuality. So you're going to have to lower your standards. You're going to have to compromise scripture in order to fit into the mold of CRT. And that's not what the church should be doing. The theory in and of itself is incompatible with Christianity, yet many cannot see this. And so it is already dividing the church. CRT seeks to divide and deconstruct, and it will do that within the walls of the church as well. Another reason DEI is not the answer is because it never ends and you can't win. You can never actually become anti-racist. You can never actually rid the system of its racism. They say that racism is everywhere, always, and imminent throughout society, that it is systemic. And they say that the only way to fix things is for people to do their anti-racist work, constantly looking for racism and constantly pointing it out when you see it, calling it out under all the time so that it's exposed. But it can never be done, it can never be finished, and you can never actually accomplish it. White fragility says that if you in any way disagree with CRT, even though I've given many valid reasons to do so, and I haven't even gotten to the biggest one yet, if you in any way disagree with it, it's because you just don't have the racial stamina that you need to do your anti-racism work. If you disagree with them, it means you have a poor character, or you're just too weak, you're just too fragile, you're just too privileged, you're just too complicit, you can't handle it. So that's what you're called if you disagree. But if you agree, then interest convergence theory says that you're only agreeing because it benefits you as a white person, that it's in your best interest. You are trying to benefit yourself by not being racist, by trying to become anti-racist, because you're trying to give yourself better status. You're trying to be a good white person and do the right thing. So if you disagree, you're screwed. And if you agree, you're screwed. They say that you need to find a person of color and you need to let them teach you and you need to learn from their lived experience. Oh, but if you do that, they call it epistemic exploitation. Bernstein wrote about this. He said, you can only learn about marginalization, about oppression from people who have experienced it. But if you try to do that, you're exploiting them. You're using them in order to become a better white person. Barbara Applebaum, in her book, Being Good, Being White, she's a CRT educator. She said that you can only ask questions about CRT in order to get closer to agreeing. You can't question it from like a critical, it's called critical race theory, but you can't have any critical thinking. That's not allowed. You can't question it in a critical way. And that disagreeing or staying silent are not options. Your only option is to agree or ask questions towards agreement. Agreement is your only option. So this whole theory lives off a mob mentality and says that whoever even slightly disagrees with the mob is a racist or a bigot. It leaves no room for open discussion, for open discourse, for debates. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about some of the things that I'm sharing today. Let's see if there's a better solution. Let's see, what are the origins of DEI, of CRT, and is this really what we want? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, hold up for a second. Is this really the direction that we want to head? Do we really want to become a Marxist society? You either join the mob or you get bulldozed by the mob. Those are your only two options when it comes to CRT. Clearly, this is deadly to our society. Society needs a diversity of opinions, and it is all for diversity, but not diversity of opinions, not diversity of perspectives. It often just results in championing this one idea as the only path forward and putting it above everything else. So by its own methods, it's actually not being diverse. It's not being inclusive. It's just disguising itself that way. Okay, guys, we're getting there. I'm ramping up to bigger and bigger reasons why it is not the answer. And I know that this is a longer episode than usual, but this is so important. I'm not sure there are many more important topics right now that we could be talking about. All right, the other reason DEI is not the answer is because it is a rejection of absolute truth. I mentioned this earlier. So if you ask for evidence that CRT is effective, that DEI will work, they say that you are using a racist tool because evidence-based research was supposedly created by racist white men. So even asking for some evidence to back up what they're saying will get you accused of being a racist, of being a bigot. Reason, logic, science, evidence, exegesis. CRT argues that the people who invented all of those things, they invented them as methods of legitimizing knowledge, specifically for the purpose of making people understand knowledge the way they want them to understand it, to prevent other cultures from gaining power. They say science, logic, reason, exegesis are invented as things to hold other people down. That blows my mind. It blows my mind that anybody would believe that, but lots of people believe that. And I don't know if you realized prior to now that that is what CRT says. Read the books written by the people who created CRT. This is what it's all about. Do you really want to ascribe to this? It is a rejection of absolute truth. It is a rejection of objective truth. Truth is based on feelings of the most marginalized person in CRT. That's how it works. They believe that emotion is the pathway to truth, to knowledge, and they deny logic, reason, and science as being the ways. Those are not ways to achieve knowledge. So it's asking you to develop a completely different worldview. Whether you are Christian or not Christian, you're still in a certain worldview that has to do with our Western society, our values. We value the things that we have discovered, the things that we have invented, and the ways that we have gotten there. And we don't see it as a way to have power over other people. It might give us knowledge is power, but not necessarily power over other people. It's power to do better, to be better, to progress, to succeed in things, but not as a way to have power over other people necessarily. Or there are always people who are power hungry. There are always going to be people of all kinds of colors who are trying to do things for the purpose of gaining power. But to say that all reason and logic and science was coming from that motive is insanity. When universities are infiltrated by this worldview, we're in trouble. And I think it's already happened. They are the houses of science and research. If they're no longer allowed to cite anything by a male or a white male, because then that is going to limit what the university is capable of knowing, what they're capable of producing. It's going to limit the knowledge that we can have as a society. And then public confidence in these institutions is going to go down, as it is. So if a white man invented something, like Morton invented anesthesia, CRT would say, we can't use that. That's a white man's science. Only white men can use that. You're saying we can't use anesthesia on somebody unless they're a white man? If a white person, I don't know if this is true, but if a white person invented the toilet, that's not just for white people, and it was definitely not invented as a way to have power over people of other colors. It just doesn't make any sense. And if we allow this to go unchecked in our research, in our universities, that we are going to cut off entire domains of inquiry, because the people that came up with the ideas had certain identity markers. We're going to cut them off because they had certain identity markers. And before you know it, we're going to have, well, this is the science of Black women, and this is the science of white men. And we're going to have all these different siloed areas of knowledge, and we're going to be completely segregated. So CRT says that everyone has their own truth. You hear this a lot in culture these days. That just shows you how much CRT has seeped into our society. There is no absolute truth. It's based on radical subjectivity. You can automatically discount anyone's opinion as just being them. That's just their truth. What about gravity? Does that still exist? I think it does. I think there is absolute truth. All right. Dun, da, da, dun, da, da, da. The biggest, most important reason why DEI is not the answer. The biggest, most important way that it is affecting you and I's everyday life. Its goal is socialism. That is its goal. James Lindsay, who I got a lot of information for this podcast, actually, he defines DEI as the installation of communist political officers for the goal of establishing socialism under a neo-Marxist identity politics mechanism. That's how he defines DEI. It all comes back to socialism. It all comes back to socialism. What is socialism? Socialism believes that it can make better decisions for you and I than we can make for ourselves. And it has failed in every country in which it has been tried. So think USSR, Venezuela, Cuba. What do you know about those places? Anything you know is probably because of socialism. That's why they made headlines. It takes the power out of our hands and it puts it into the hands of the government. It professes to put power in the hands of the people. That's what it says it does. Like, you go Google socialism, you're going to get some nice little thing about how it puts all the power into the hands of the people. But it's not true in practice. It actually takes all of the power of the people and puts it in the hands of the government, because we all give to the government and then it dishes it all back out to us equally, in theory. Sounds nice until you realize that we will all equally have as little as the government could possibly get away with giving us. We all know that's true. If we give everything, our homes, our land, our money, everything over to the government and trust that they will just dish it all back out to us all equally, we know that's not going to happen. They're going to dish back out the bare minimum. You might be thinking, wait, I thought socialism was just about sharing everything. The Encyclopedia Britannica says that socialism is a social and economic doctrine that calls for public rather than private ownership or control of property and natural resources. So according to the socialist view, individuals do not live or work in isolation, but live in cooperation with one another. Furthermore, everything that people produce is in some sense a social product, and everyone who contributes to the production of the good is entitled to their share in it. Society as a whole, therefore, should own or at least control property for the benefit of all its members. And this is opposed to capitalism. Capitalism, what we live in now, what we've been living in, is based on private ownership and a free market that allows individuals to determine for themselves how goods and services are distributed. I know that's a lot. That's a lot of big talk. If you meet a socialist on the street, they will probably tell you that in a socialist economy, all work is done for the good of the whole, rather than any individual doing what's just good for their family or good for their business. That we are all, it's a collectivist mindset. We're all contributing to the good of the whole. And you might think that sounds good. Maybe you've already been thinking that sounds good. Again, why? Because it sounds fair, right? If you're a Bible reader, you might even think that kind of sounds like the early church. Maybe socialism is a biblical thing. The problem lies in the how. How are we getting from private ownership that we have right now to public ownership where we're all sharing for the common good? I mean, if you break it down into practical terms, okay, how is this going to happen? What does that transition look like? What does it look like if we walk this out in everyday life? And I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like government elites forcing people to give up their private property, to give up the profits that they've earned for the so-called common good, and then the government distributing it as they see fit, doing what they want with my money, with your money, with my property, with your property, completely giving over control, trusting that the government is going to fairly and equally distribute all of that. It also looks like nothing's going to motivate us. We're not going to want to work hard or try hard because it doesn't matter. We're not getting anything for our efforts. But someone has to be the authority. If we're going to transition, if we're going to go from capitalist to a socialist society, someone has to be the authority, requiring people to give up everything that they have for the common good. And that authority will be our government, who will be in total and complete control over us. And we will own nothing. The elites want socialism. You ever wonder, like, they're rich. Why would they want social? Why would they want to give up what they have for the common good? Because, like, they got it good in the capitalist society. Why are they fighting for this? Because they don't actually intend to give themselves the same as they're giving us. They want it because they can control us. And people fall for this because they think it's moral and they think it's fair. Let's just all split everything fairly. That sounds great. But it fails to account for human nature. Have you ever met humans before? Do you really think that the people to which you are handing over everything and that you no longer having anything, that you don't privately own anything, you're handing everything over to your government, do you really think that those people are going to do what's best for the common good? Have you met our politicians? If you're not a greedy person, you might fall for this because you're like, well, if I were in position, I would do it. Yeah, but you're not in that position. You're being naive and you're underestimating just how greedy some other people are. The truth is that socialism has been tried, has been attempted in many civilizations, and it has been destructive. And we're headed there. Embracing DEI and CRT is taking us there. America, the United States of America. People are not trying to flee Florida for Cuba right now. But people in Cuba will do anything to get to Florida. Do you notice all the people that have been coming over our border lately? They're coming north. They're coming towards freedom-loving America. We are not fleeing America to go south to these socialist countries. There's a reason for that. Before you accept this ideology, why don't you first understand it? Why don't you first look at the destruction that it has caused in the past? I will probably do a whole episode on this because I've already gone over quite a bit today. It goes a lot deeper than this. I've been studying it quite a bit, and yeah, I'm probably just going to have to do a separate episode. But for now, let's just say that DEI is a tool of critical race theory, which is rooted in a drive toward socialism. And that is the biggest reason why we should resist any and all DEI initiatives. Ultimately, DEI is leading you to believe that you need to tear down, deconstruct, destroy everything that America has stood upon, because everything that America stands upon is unfair, it's evil, and it's racist. And then guess what? Once we've all destroyed ourselves, once we've all deconstructed our own society, our own values, they can erect socialism in its aftermath. Then they can sweep in and they can put what they want in place. You see, it's not that they really believe that whites are bad, or that they really believe that Christians are bad. Christians have done more to serve the world through missionary work than any other group. They know we're not bad. We're just not wanted. We're obstacles. We're standing in the way of the system that they want to put in place. So they have to villainize us. That's also why our borders are being flooded with people that are different from us, who have different values. They're trying to tear down what we have here because it is keeping them from controlling us. DEI is luring you into a socialist system like a frog put in water. You know the saying, you put the frog in water and then you slowly turn up the heat to boiling and it doesn't realize that it's being boiled. And next thing you know, you're eating frog legs. I don't want to have my legs eaten. The truth is, there is absolute truth. And science is about discovering those truths. That's the truth. The truth is that we are all one race. We are all one race, the human race. If you line everybody up from the whitest white person and the darkest dark person, and you put them all in order of how light skin they are to how dark skin they are, you're barely going to be able to tell the difference from one person to the next. It's extremely gradual change in colors. It's all about different levels of melanin in our skin. We all have color. We are all people of color. My color just might be a little more peach and somebody else's might be a little more brown or something. We're all the human race. We are all one race. We have different cultures. We have different communities. We have different levels of marginalization. We've experienced different opportunities, but we are all one race. And this is truly a cultural issue, not a race issue. And the only two categories that any Christian should be worried about putting people into are saved and unsaved, not for the purpose of judging people, but because we want to reach the lost. You're either found or you're lost. Those are the only categories that should matter to us. The truth is that we are all made in the image of God, every single one of us. And we are all called to love our neighbor, no matter what social category they're in. The truth is that the church is supposed to be one in Christ, not divided. So what is the answer? I've told you DEI is not the answer, but what is the answer? Well, a few things. If you really think that somebody is marginalized or depressed and you want to give them real help, then give them help that is actually going to help them. Teach them, train them, let them know about different opportunities, show them the process of taking advantage of those opportunities. Don't give them a handout because handouts are not helpful. It does not help them. But look at what are the real causes that DEI is trying to have us not look at. What are the real causes for any inequality or inequity that we see in the world? And try to correct those in a holistic way, not through DEI. And then take full advantage of any opportunities that are given to you so that you can share in the good outcomes. And I would add to that we need to be basing things on merit and fit. And that alone, we do not put somebody in certain positions because of what color they are, what their sexual preferences are, what their hair color is, what their eye color is. Identity characteristics are not what gets you in a certain position. Both ways. We shouldn't hire people because we need more people of color, and we shouldn't hire people because we relate with them because we're white and they're white. All of that is wrong. It should be based on fit and merit alone. Forgive each other. I think a lot of this is accepted by America because we have this deeply rooted grudge that a lot of Black people in our society have and it's being promoted. I don't know what the right word is, but they're being encouraged to continue holding on to a grudge that their ancestors were enslaved by white people's ancestors and that we owe them something. The answer to that issue, the only answer to that issue is forgiveness. Forgive the people in the past who may have done something wrong to the people of your past. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. I didn't exist. It wasn't even you that was hurt. May you have some effects from that? Possibly. But we all have effects from the unforgiveness and bitterness that is dividing Americans. So let's forgive. Let's continue to have healthy debate and open discussion. Let's continue to seek objective reality. Let's use science and logic and reason. And let's resist any and all DEI policies in your workplace, in your school, and beyond. Do not participate in them. Do not initiate them. Have nothing to do with them. We do not want to be slowly boiled to socialism. In order to stop that from happening, we have to stand firm. We have to stand on truth, even if we have to stand alone. An alternative program to DEI, entrepreneur Chloe Valderi gave a really good one. She gives an alternative way for companies to approach race relations at work if they're having an issue instead of DEI. She says, we start with 3 foundational principles which everyone can get behind. Treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. Criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down or destroy. And root everything you do in love and compassion. I like that. And lastly, the last thing you need to do, very important, vote. Vote for representatives that stand against CRT. Figure out what their stance is on it, and that should determine how you vote. Just so you know, Kamala Harris, who at the recording of this episode is going to supposedly be the Democratic nominee, she is a strong supporter of CRT. So get out there and vote. Stand firm. We do not have to let this take over our country. It's up to us, we the people.